Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The barrel of the gun was cold against Kaelin's temple, but not nearly as freezing as the eyes staring into his own. "Give me one reason," Julian hissed, his voice a low vibration that rattled the expensive crystal decanters on the mahogany desk. "Just one reason why I shouldn't paint this office with your brains right now." It wasn't the threat that made Kaelin's breath hitch. It was the heartbreak buried beneath the strata of rage in Julian's gaze. 3 years. They had been married for 3 years. 3 years of breakfasts on the balcony overlooking the Neo-Seoul skyline. 3 years of whispered confidences in the dark. 3 years of Kaelin playing the role of the perfect, fragile partner to the most ruthless corporate overload in the sector. And it had taken less than 3 minutes for the facade to shatter. The thumb drive in Kaelin's hand, the one containing the Vane family's deepest trade secrets, felt heavy, like lead. "Because," Kaelin whispered, dropping the submissive act he had perfected, his voice dropping an octave to its natural, commanding timbre. "If you shoot me, Julian, you'll never know which of your loyal board members hired me to destroy you." The silence that followed was deafening. It was the silence of a vacuum, sucking the air out of the room. Julian Vane, the alpha of the Vane Syndicate, didn't flinch. He didn't tremble. But the scent in the room shifted. It curdled from the pleasant aroma of sandalwood and rain that usually surrounded him into something acrid, burnt ozone and gensmoke. It was the smell of a predator who realized he had been sleeping with a viper. To understand the tragedy of this moment, one must understand the lie that built it. In the high-stakes world of the corporate sectors, biology was destiny. Alphas ruled, betas worked, and omegas were bartered like precious, fragile commodities to cement alliances. Julian Vane was the apex, tall, with hair the color of spun silver and eyes like shards of obsidian. He was a man who commanded rooms simply by entering them. He was powerful, wealthy, and utterly alone. His board of directors had demanded a union. They needed to soften his image, to show that the cold-blooded CEO had a heart. They wanted him to marry an Omega, someone soft, pliable, and domestic. Enter Kaelin Thorne. Kaelin had appeared as if from a dream. He was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. Dark hair that fell into eyes the color of sea glass, a slender frame, and a demeanor that screamed gentleness. His papers identified him as a recessive Omega from a fallen minor house. He was perfect. He was safe. Or so Julian had thought. For 3 years, Kaelin had played the part. He wore the scent blockers that mimicked the sweet, floral pheromones of an Omega. He let Julian lead. He let Julian protect him. He warmed Julian's bed and, eventually, his frozen heart. Julian, a man who trusted no one, had learned to exhale when he walked through the door of their penthouse. He had learned to trust the warmth of Kaelin's hand in his. But Kaelin was no Omega. He was a ghost, an unregistered alpha trained by the rival consortium, Helios. He was a weapon forged in the slums, polished to a shine, and sent to infiltrate the Vane Empire. His mission was simple. Gather intel, locate the kill switch for Vane's defense grid, and get out. The problem with deep cover assignments, however, is that sometimes the mask becomes the face. The memories assaulted Kaelin as he stood there, gun to his head. He remembered the night of the gala, 6 months into their marriage. An assassin had tried to slip poison into Julian's champagne. Kaelin had seen it. Instinct had screamed at him to let it happen. It would complete his mission. But his body had moved on its own. He had clumsily bumped into the waiter, sending the tray crashing down. Julian had chided him for his clumsiness, wiping champagne off Kaelin's lapel with a tenderness that made Kaelin's chest ache. Why didn't I let him die? Kaelin thought, staring at the man who now wanted to kill him. Because I fell in love with the mark. It was a cliché. It was pathetic. It was forbidden. 2 alphas cannot coexist in a relationship without a constant battle for dominance. It is biological law. And yet, Kaelin had submitted, suppressing his nature with dangerous chemical cocktails, damaging his own body to maintain the ruse. Tonight, the ruse had ended. Julian had come home early. He wasn't supposed to be back until morning. He had found Kalen at the main terminal, bypassing the encryption that only the CEO should have access to. The fight had been brief but shocking. When Julian grabbed him, Kalen hadn't crumpled like an Omega. He had countered, a reflex of his training, flipping Julian over his hip with a strength that was impossible for anyone but an elite alpha. That physical contact, that sudden explosion of equal strength, was what had truly broken Julian. "You're an alpha," Julian said now, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. He pressed the gun harder against Kalen's skin. All this time, the suppressants, the faint spells, it wasn't because you were a weak Omega. It was because you were poisoning yourself to hide what you are. "I did what I had to do," Kalen said, his eyes hardening. He couldn't afford to be soft anymore. The dynamic had shifted. This wasn't husband and wife. This was soldier and soldier. "Helios wants your grid, Julian. They're going to launch a hostile takeover within the week. I was sent to open the gates." "And were you?" Julian's finger tightened on the trigger. "Were you opening them right now?" "No," Kalen said, his voice steady. "I was changing the encryption keys. I was locking them out." Julian laughed, a harsh, barking sound void of humor. "You expect me to believe that? You've lied to me every single day for 3 years. You've lied with every breath, every touch, every, 'I love you.' Why should I trust a traitor?" "Because I'm still here," Kalen snapped, his own alpha pheromones finally breaking through the waning suppressants. The scent hit the air, a heavy, rich smell of cedarwood, leather, and steel. It clashed violently with Julian's ozone scent, the two dominant auras warring for space in the enclosed office. For a moment, Julian looked drunk on it. The biological shock of sensing a rival alpha in his territory triggered a primal aggression, but mixed with the confusing familiarity of the man he loved, it created a volatile cocktail of lust and rage. "You stayed," Julian murmured, stepping closer, invading Kalen's space. He didn't lower the gun. "To lock them out? Or because you couldn't finish the job?" "Because you're mine," Kalen growled. The possessiveness surged out of him, unbidden. "I don't care about Helios. I don't care about the Empire. But I won't let them kill you." "Arrogance?" Julian sneered, though his hand trembled slightly. "You think you can claim me? You think because you hid your nature, you're my equal?" "I don't think I'm your equal, Julian," Kalen said softly. "I know I am." With a speed that blurred the air, Kalen moved. He didn't strike to injure, he struck to disarm. His hand chopped against Julian's wrist, knocking the gun to the plush carpet. Before Julian could react, Kalen shoved him back against the heavy oak desk. Papers flew. The lamp crashed to the floor. Julian roared, the sound distinctively animalistic, and lunged. This was no domestic dispute. This was a brawl. Fists flew, blocked by forearms hard as iron. They grapple, crashing into the bookshelves, sending legal tomes tumbling around them. It was cathartic. It was violent. It was the truth finally laid bare. Julian landed a solid punch to Kalen's jaw, splitting his lip. Kalen didn't falter. He used the momentum to sweep Julian's legs, bringing them both crashing to the floor. Kalen ended up on top, pinning Julian's wrists above his head with a grip that bruised. They were both panting, chests heaving, sweat mingling with the blood from Kalen's lip. The air was thick, heavy with the intoxicating, suffocating pressure of two alphas in close proximity. "Do it," Julian challenged, staring up at him. His eyes were wide, pupils blown, reflecting the chaos of the room. "Snap my neck. Finish your mission, Ghost." Kalen looked down at him. He saw the betrayal, the hurt, but he also saw the undeniable heat rising in Julian's gaze. The body does not lie, even when the mind feels betrayed. The friction of their struggle had ignited something dormant. "I told you," Kalen panted, blood dripping from his lip onto Julian's pristine white shirt, a stark red stain over his heart. "I'm locking them out." "You're a liar," Julian whispered, but he stopped struggling. Who are you really? Does Kalen Thorne even exist? Kalen Thorne was a mask, the spy admitted, leaning down, his face inches from Julian's. My name is Silas, and I am the only thing standing between you and a grave. Silas. Julian tested the name. It sounded like a curse. Get off me. No. I said get off. And I said no. Kalen Silas tightened his grip. You're used to everyone obeying you, Julian. You're used to the world bending to your will. But I'm not your employee. I'm not your submissive Omega husband. I am an alpha. And right now I'm the one on top. The defiance sparked a fire in Julian's eyes that burned brighter than the betrayal. It was a challenge. And for a man like Julian Vane, a challenge was the only thing more addictive than power. You think this creates leverage? Julian asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You think because you pinned me once, you've won? You've just started a war, Silas. You have no idea what I do to my enemies. I know exactly what you do, Silas replied, his gaze dropping to Julian's lips, then back to his eyes. You destroy them. But you can't destroy me, Julian. Why not? Because... Silas leaned in, brushing his lips against Julian's ear, sending a shiver down the CEO's spine that had nothing to do with fear. You haven't figured out how to hate me yet. Suddenly, the door to the office burst open. Sir, we heard a crash. The head of security, a burly beta named Graves, froze in the doorway. He took in the scene. The shattered lamp, the overturned chair, the papers scattered like confetti, and his boss pinned to the floor by his Omega husband. Silas didn't flinch. He didn't scramble off. He slowly turned his head to look at Graves, his eyes glowing with a predatory intensity that made the security chief take a step back. Get out, Silas commanded. Graves looked at Julian, confused. Sir. Julian stared up at Silas. The air crackled. This was the moment. He could order Graves to shoot. He could end the threat. He could erase the mistake of the last 3 years. But the heat of Silas's body against his was a drug he wasn't ready to detox from. The revelation that his gentle husband was actually a lethal weapon capable of holding him down. It was twisting something deep inside his psyche. You heard him, Julian said, his voice steady, never breaking eye contact with Silas. Get out. And lock the door. Graves paled, nodded, and retreated, the lock clicking shut with a finality that echoed like a gunshot. Silas looked back down at Julian. Why? Because, Julian said, a cruel smile touching his lips as he finally freed one hand, not to strike, but to grab Silas by the back of the neck and pull him down. I want to see exactly how tough you are before I decide whether to kill you or keep you. The kiss was not romantic. It was a collision. It was teeth and tongue and desperation. It was a battle for dominance expressed through contact. Julian bit down on Silas's lower lip, reopening the wound, tasting the copper. Silas groaned, a low rumble in his chest, and ground his hips down, asserting his weight. They were enemies. They were liars. They were two alphas locked in a room, and the world outside was burning. But as Julian's hand slid down Silas's back, feeling the tense muscles of a warrior beneath the silk shirt, he knew one thing for certain. The domestic bliss was over. The game had changed. And this new game, this violent, high-stakes dance of power and deception, was infinitely more interesting. Julian broke the kiss, breathless, his eyes wild. You have until morning, Silas? He spat the name like a slur. Fix the encryption. Save my company. If you succeed, you live another day in this house as my prisoner. If you fail, I'll hand you over to Helios myself, piece by piece. Silas pulled back, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. He stood up, offering a hand to Julian. Julian looked at the hand, then at Silas's face. He slapped the hand away and stood up on his own, straightening his ruined suit. Don't ever offer me pity, Julian warned, walking to the window to look out at the neon-soaked city. And don't think for a second that this changes the outcome. You broke my trust. There is no coming back from that. We'll see, Silas said quietly, moving to the computer terminal. His fingers began to fly across the keyboard, the blue light illuminating the sharp angles of his face. The face of a stranger Julian had slept beside for 1,000 nights. As the code scrolled across the screen, Julian watched him from the reflection in the glass. He touched his bruised lips. The anger was still there, a roaring inferno. But beneath it, the curiosity was taking root. His husband was a monster. Good, Julian thought, his eyes narrowing. I was beginning to get bored with a saint. But the night was far from over. As Silas worked, a red warning light began to flash on the console. Julian, Silas said, his voice tight, the lockout is not working. Someone else is in the system. Julian turned, the predator reawakening. What? It's not Helios, Silas said, turning to face him, fear finally flickering in his eyes for the first time. It's coming from inside the building. The traitor isn't just me. Someone else is here. And they just activated the building's lockdown protocols. Steel shutters slammed down over the windows. The office door engaged its magnetic seals. The red emergency lights began to rotate, casting the room in a blood-colored haze. We're trapped, Julian realized, moving to his desk to grab a spare magazine for his gun. He tossed it to Silas. Silas caught it, surprised. If we're going to die tonight, Julian said, racking the slide of his own weapon, standing back to back with the man who had deceived him. I'd rather it be by my hand than theirs. Silas smirked, loading the weapon with practiced ease. Agreed. The elevator dinged. The doors slid open. And that is how the viper tamed the wolf, by forcing him to bare his teeth. If you enjoyed seeing the power dynamic flip between Julian and Silas, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments. Would you trust a partner who lied about their entire identity to save your life? Or would you pull the trigger? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then.